Good morning, I am Stephen Edholm from SkillCult.com, and today I'm going to show you some new, improved, smarter ways to train your fruit trees to get the form that you want. These are my seedling trees for fruit tree breeding trials, and this is where I plant the trees and allow them to grow until they fruit, and then I can assess the fruit and decide whether to pull them out or graft them or whatever. So this offers us some trees that we can use as examples, and maybe hopefully if everything goes right we'll follow these for a few years and see how they grow and kind of do follow-up, because you need about 2 or 3 years to get a good form for a tree. Now it used to take me longer than that, but with these new improved smarter methods we can do it faster, better, with more control. We can more likely get what we want. It's just good all around. Now this is important because the common recommendations for training fruit trees are pretty primitive, clunky, ineffective. I call it clip and pray. We'll take a look at that too, and we'll set some trees up with that and see how that goes. But my hope is not just to give you a set of tools that you can use at home and wherever you're in your life training fruit trees, but also to ultimately affect the common recommendations for training fruit trees, so that when you buy a tree from the nursery, instead of telling you, the usual recommendations that we see right now and that go way, way back, they'll give you something more along the lines of what I'm talking about here. Now I like to think of all my projects as work in progress, or anything else. If I read about something that someone else is offering, like something that they figured out or put together, I'm not interested in buying things as packages. I don't go, oh, this is great, I believe this now. The new paradigm is basically open source, right? People should be looking at stuff and saying, oh, that's interesting. How is this person right? How is this person wrong? Like, how can we add to this? How can we improve it, make it better, evolve it, forward? So I like to think of this as an open collaborative effort. Pruning and training trees is an art, not a science. Now, if you train the exact same variety of tree over and over and over again, thousands of them in little rows like this, then it becomes more and more of a science. But for most of us, it's more of an art, and you have to make judgment calls and decisions, and you have to experiment a little bit. Sometimes things are going to work great, sometimes they're not, and that's just the reality of it. If you don't view it that way, you're just going to be disappointed. But anyway, I can give you a set of tools that I think you can apply broadly to a lot of different situations depending on what form of tree that you want, and it's going to vary by species and by variety even. Among different, say, like varieties of apples, there's a lot of difference in the way that the trees grow and the way that they're going to respond. But in general, it's good. It's really great stuff, and you can hardly do worse than the common recommendations, which are essentially to take your single tree, say, where do I want the first branch, and cut it off. That's the common recommendation right there. That's for the first year anyway, and then you just kind of hope stuff grows where you want, and then go from there. I've done a lot of not tons and tons, I'm not a professional, but I've done quite a bit of experimenting and fruit tree training here on my homestead. I had mediocre results with these kind of common recommendations, and just kind of cutting stuff off and hoping it would branch the way that I wanted it. Sometimes I got what I wanted, sometimes I didn't. Now I almost always get what I want if I have some specific goal in mind. Now that's another story, and you'll probably do another video on fruit tree forms, although we'll talk about them a little bit here because we're actually going to go after a specific form. But that's kind of a different video, and also I'll probably do a video that's like a total geek session on this technique, where it came from and stuff like that. Now as we go along here, this will give us an opportunity to talk about some general principles of how trees grow, because that's what this is really all based on. I'm calling it smart tree training. It's simple, it's easy to remember. Everyone's going to want to do it because it'll make them seem like they're more smarter and not more dumber. If you share this, please use those terms, and if you tag my name on it, that's great, because it helps me get recognition for getting this stuff out there, and that's obviously important. Everyone likes to be recognized for their contributions, and also it gets me traffic, and the more traffic I get, the more people I can influence, the more money I get for projects and all that stuff. Okay, so let's do this. The common recommendation, like I said, is to clip this off. So we're going to reduce this plant to a single leader. This is not what I would normally do to these trees at all. I would probably just let them grow, but we're going to kind of sacrifice these for experimentation's sake early. Okay, like I said, the common recommendation is to cut this off where you want the first branch or the first branches to grow, depending on what kind of form you're using. Now the reason that works is because when you cut this off, it stimulates these buds to grow out. Like you'll see in a wild tree, often it'll grow up, it'll stop growing, and then the next year when it starts growing up again, a few branches will grow outward here, and a lot of times this will just stay the way it is, you know, without any branching. So when we cut this off, a few things are probably going to happen. One or two of these buds, usually the top one, is going to go straight up, and that's going to become the new leader. You know, they kind of compete with themselves in a way to regulate the growth of the tree. So the top of the tree sends down hormonal signals, and it tells this stuff not to grow as much or to grow differently. Like for instance, the first bud or two here will grow really straight and have like it'll come out from the stem at a sharp angle and then go straight up. And these will tend to come out a little bit more horizontally, maybe 45 degrees or something. And what it's doing is it's saying, well, I'm going to go up, I'm going to keep going up, and you guys go out this way and start making, you know, branches and fruit. You're going to shade, you know, the base of the tree. You're going to make a canopy, basically, so the tree doesn't just keep growing straight up. That also keeps, you know, the tree from having just a whole bunch of shoots. Like every shoot doesn't just grow up and just have all these competing shoots. Now, some trees grow that way, but most don't. Now this principle of the top being dominant and sending, you know, hormones to suppress growth down here is real important, and we'll come back to that again. So you may be able to see pretty obviously the limitations of this. You know, I've cut it off and now I'm just going to pray. I call it clip and pray. So I'm just going to clip it off and hope that the stuff grows where I want it to grow. All right, now these two trees we're going to train to two different methods. They're very similar, but they're different. One's called the delayed open center, that's this one, and this is the modified central leader. Now each of these is going to start with a main trunk, so I'm going to reduce this to a single stick. And this is ideal if you want to train a fruit tree. To me, this is ideally what you want to start with, is what's called a whip or a maiden. That's because nothing has grown yet and you can choose what you want to grow and what you don't. If the tree is 2 years old, like a lot of bare root trees are from the nursery, then you've already got some branching and you have to kind of like pick and choose from that. So personally, I don't like 2-year trees. I've had not very good luck with them, and I prefer to get maidens. If I grow stuff, I try to train it in this first year when it's in this stage right here. Okay, let's talk about the delayed open center. So the open center or vase tree is basically like, let's say I cut this off and then it's going to grow some branches, and I pick 3 to 5 branches like in this area, and they grow in different directions. So they have an open center like a funnel that lets a lot of light in, which is great. It's easy to manage. The tree is low. And that's all interesting. The problem with it, and this has been known for a long time and, you know, widely recognized, is that the branches tend to grow from a similar place. Like if I just cut this off, you know, it's not going to grow a lot of branches down here probably. Most of them are going to grow right here. And we'll have a bunch of branches growing from the same spot, which makes a weak connection to the trunk. Ideally, the branches should be spaced out. So the delayed open center is basically created to address that specific problem. And what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, we want our first branch at a certain level, and then like 8 to 10 inches, let's say. Usually it's like 6 to 12 inches, but 8 to 10 inches is a good number. 8 to 10 inches, we're going to pick another branch. It's going to grow in a different direction. Then 8 or 10 inches here, we're going to pick another branch growing in another direction. We're going to have 3 to 5 main branches, and you can think of those actually as trunks in both of these systems. This is really the same system as the vase or the open center that I just talked about. It's just that we're spacing these branches out further. And then at the top, you know, you have a final branch that bends over, or you just cut it off and let the last branch grow. Now this is real interesting because it establishes co-dominance. So remember before we had this leader going up, like the central leader piece, and it was sending messages down and saying, you know, don't grow down here the same, you know, don't grow up. Well, in this case, we're going to have a bunch of trunks, and they all share the resources of the tree. So that's the other thing I want you to think about, is think about the resources of the tree coming up and how there are only so many of those resources, and how are those going to be shared out as the tree grows up. It looks like we're going to get some light here, so I have to make an adjustment to my lens. All right, we're just going to have to roll with what the weather gives us here, and obviously I can't do this over again. Okay, so that's how this system works. I hope that makes sense. But co-dominance is a really important thing, and this is one of the main tree growth principles that we need to keep in mind. What's dominant, what's not, and what's sharing dominance, and just how are we going to direct the resources of the tree as they come up. Okay, so let's look at the tools we have to make this happen. So the first thing to do is choose where I want the branches, because we're not clipping and praying. We're going to choose exactly which bud and which branch we want to grow exactly where we want it. So I want the lowest branch to be on the west or maybe the southwest, wherever the sun comes in. Here it's like west, southwest. When the sun gets out here, it starts to come down low and it's really intense in the afternoon and it hits the trunk and it sunburns the trunk. So let's pick one going out this way. And you know, how high to pick to do that is, yeah, that's just another subject. But it could be anywhere from real low like this to, you know, at your head height. Like in the old days when they had cows and sheep grazing under the trees were often at head height. It's easy to walk around underneath, but obviously it's hard to manage the tree because you have to use a ladder. Okay, so I'm just going to mark these. This is something I learned from Wamea Nursery on YouTube. Thanks for that tip. And we're going to pick we're going to pick 4 in this case. So I'm going to do the first one west, the second one kind of in this direction because south is somewhere over here. This looks good right here. So that's the next one. Honestly, this is a great tip with these clothespins because it's real hard to keep track of it in your head when you're looking at these things. We'll go with this one. 1, 2, 3, and we're going to need one more that goes this way. Obviously I could start this lower down, but let's say that this is the height that I want to start with, and that's just how it is. And we're assuming that this is going to be a full-size tree, which it's not. This is just an experiment. So we ran out of buds, and that's okay. We'll talk about that in a minute. This technique I learned from a study that was done in 1925. Unfortunately, it didn't have very much effect on recommendations for training fruit trees, but it's great. And that is we're going to disbud. Oh, by the way, timing-wise, I usually do this while the trees are dormant, but it's fine. In fact, the study that I got this from, they disbudded in June, I think. Maybe not on purpose, but it worked, you know. So what we're going to do is where we want the branch, we're going to leave about 3 or 4 buds. So I'm going to take this off. This is the one I want back here. You can't see it. I'm going to leave 1, 2, 3, and 4. Everything else comes off. Now in this case, you'll see this one here really wants to grow. This is the strong one. So, you know, if you want to spend a bunch of time trying to pick those out and, you know, choose those, that's fine, but you don't need to. I'm going to take that off because it's the strongest shoot and I don't want it to be the strongest shoot. I want those resources to be transferred to this right here, which is actually fairly weak. Okay, I'm going to leave 3. 1, 2, 3. And disbud everything else. All right, so let's take a look at what we ended up with here. We ended up with a tree with fewer growing points, right? Now what that's going to do is it's going to increase the likelihood that these actually grow out into branches. So already we've directed those resources into fewer growing points so that they'll grow more. Okay, pretty simple. But we're going to add one more thing, and that is notching. And the original study that I read, they didn't use any notching, but this really increases the success rate of getting exactly what you want, because we didn't just say I want a branch here, I want a branch here, I want a branch here. We said I want a branch here in this direction, I want this, you know, this bud to grow that way and this bud should go this way. So if we notch above these buds, very simple. You can also use a rat tail file for this and just, you know, rub across the bark and rub the bark off, file it off. What that's going to do is one of 2 things that I'm not actually even sure which it is because I haven't studied it enough, and I honestly just don't even care that much. It's either that it's stopping hormonal signals that are coming down the tree saying, hey, don't grow up, right? Don't grow that much, kind of just grow out and make some fruit. Or it's taking resources that are coming up the tree, and because there's a notch here, instead of continuing up the tree, they're guided into this shoot and then it grows out. Whatever the case, it works. So you want this to go, you know, through the bark and just slightly into the wood. At least scrape the surface of the wood, and about 1/3 of the way around the tree is a good rule of thumb. But since we left extra buds, we have some insurance, right? So if things don't work out our way, we at least have something here that's, you know, going to grow out. So I'm going to go along and I'm going to notch above each one of these buds. Now don't cut too deep because you'll weaken the stem and it'll break. Okay, just you know, cut through the bark and maybe scrape the wood a little bit. All right, Now when we come back and follow up on this tree, you know, after it starts growing, if there's a problem, like let's say this is growing pretty good, the bud we wanted, but one of these is vastly outgrowing it, we can just cut that off or pinch it way back or something. We can notch it a little bit deeper, we can re-notch it if it's been healed up. So there's things you can do to kind of guide it during the summer. The only other thing I would say is maybe whitewash the trunk with 50-50 latex paint and water, just like household latex paint. Not the chemically really smelly stuff, but you know, just kind of regular interior house paint. And that'll keep these bare sections of stem, which are kind of unnatural, from getting sunburned if you're in an area where, you know, trees are prone to getting sunburned. All right, so that's a delayed open center. You can make these a little bit closer together. Like, you know, if the tree was like a dwarfish form, like, you know, not expecting the tree to grow very big, 6 inches is enough. And then you can keep the branches a little bit close together. Now, we have a problem here, right, where we didn't have enough room. So as this grows up in the summer, we're going to come back and see if we can actually stimulate a branch to grow where we want it here by notching. The other thing you can do is, as this grows up, say it reaches about here or something, we can come back and cut it to 8 inches to encourage branching in that area, and that works too. But we're actually going to try to notch it this year and see if we can get it to grow, you know, the branch that we want. Okay, so the next form of tree we're going to do is very similar, except it's like this. It's the same form, except it has a little like center top thing going on. So I'm going to again reduce this to a single whip, but I do want to show you something here. Okay, see how this is real tight, this crotch right here? We want to avoid that in tree training in general, because if these are too close together and this angle is too steep, as they grow, you'll get bark trapped in this space right here, and that makes a weak junction. So eventually this will grow 2 tops and it'll want to split. The other thing we see here is co-dominance, right? This is what I was talking about. So because these are pretty much the same height and the same vigor, likely these will both keep growing, and eventually we'll get this situation where each trunk grows smaller, but we have 2 main trunks. And again, because this crotch is so tight, we're going to have splitting there. And we'll come back to that point, because as the tree grows, we want to make sure that these shoots grow out at a wide enough angle, because if they grow too straight up and we get bark trapped in here, that makes a weak limb. But we'll talk more about that later. All right, with this tree, we're going to choose, let's say we'll do 3 this time. We want 3 or 4 main branches, no more than 4, but at least 3. So 3 or 4. I'm going to do 3 in this case. Again, this one's going to go kind of toward the west or southwest. And let's actually pick something going this way. Yeah, that's good. And something going more this way. So one of the cool things about this is I can choose, you know, any bud I want, and I don't have to choose the strong buds or the buds that are already trying to grow out into branches. So we're going to leave 4 there. Let's say, take all this off, leave 4 there. If these are buds, you just pick them out with your fingernail or your thumbnail. Now with this form of tree, we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to have branch this way, branch this way, branch this way, and then as this grows up to about 18 to 20 inches, something like that, I'm going to cut it off. And what we're going to end up with, and I'll show you this later in an established tree so you'll understand it better, is we're going to have co-dominance between all of these parts of the tree, just like we did here. We're going to have the same kind of almost, you know, open center form, but in the center we're going to have a small centerpiece that's going to come up and it's going to terminate, and it's just not going to grow that much, and it's not going to be dominant, because these branches are going to grow out and up, and they're all going to be like their own trunks, except that they're coming off of different parts of the tree, and we'll show you that later. Okay, so what do we do for follow-up? With this one, since we don't need any more branches, like this one we need another branch, so we'll come back and try to deal with that in the summer. This one we would just want to come back in maybe June and make sure that these branches are growing out the way that we want them. So make sure that they're growing out at a strong enough angle, make sure that the ones we picked are growing. I have to notch these still too, but I'll do that. So make sure they're growing out and growing it enough. If you get something that's competing too much, pinch it back, cut it off, whatever. But you do want to let these other shoots grow, because they create leaves which feed the whole plant and they help thicken the trunk, and that's important at this point, because you can see these are kind of wimpy. And one of the reasons that they'll tell you to cut these back is to thicken the whole tree, and so it doesn't get all wispy and fall over. But I haven't found that to be a problem using this method. Okay, so this is like one of these common dogmas that you hear all the time. You know, I heard it, I repeated it, you know, my friends heard it, they repeat it, and everyone uses it and they go by it. But when these guys in 1925, they didn't go by common recommendations, they didn't go by hearsay, they designed a study and they studied the problem and they just found that it wasn't a problem. And that's what I found too, it's just not a problem. Will it be a problem in some cases, like maybe, you know, the tree will grow too fast and too wimpy and it'll tend to fall over? Yeah, probably. You know, I mean, but there's staking too, and there's a lot of more benefits to this. And honestly, I'm trying to think of a situation where it was a real problem for me, and I can't think of a single one. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take, you know, I cut this off already. We're going to cut this one off too. You know, I want the branches to start right here, so I'm going to go up just like a couple of buds here and cut that off, and we'll just see how those grow back. I'm going to also reduce this to a single whip. And the other thing I'm going to do is come back with whitewash, hopefully, that's the plan, and whitewash these trunks, because I do have real bad problems with sunburn, and that could be a serious problem with this method. Okay, so I'm going to notch this and get it set up, and hopefully we'll be able to revisit these on a regular basis, really over the next couple of years, and follow up on them. I'm also going to move this sheet now, and I'm going to show you some trees that have grown for a couple of years and what you can do with those, because I know a lot of people are going to be in situations where they need to do remedial pruning. The average fruit tree that you get, bare root, has been grown for 2 years in the nursery, and it was cut off at some point to encourage it to branch. And I think that's, like I said, not preferable, but you're going to have to deal with that. So we're going to look at some trees that will offer me a chance to explain some of the things you can do to try to get the tree to grow the way you want it, if it's already started to grow. Because again, this is ideal. If you have a whip, you can start exactly how you want and make everything happen the way you want it. So I'm going to notch this, move that sheet, and we'll talk about that stuff.